So let me just start by saying welcome. Thank you for joining me here. I know that probably none of us want to be here on a Friday morning for me talking about grief. So I appreciate that you are here. We're going to talk about a difficult topic today. I'm going to have some exercises for you to do. We are going to dig in a little deeper to some of the things that might be going on with you right now. So if you're watching this at your desk at work, you may want to consider closing a door or getting somewhere where you can get a little quiet time on your own. But this is a really important topic for me, one that I think doesn't really get talked about enough. So I'm going to share some of my insights with you. So I'm going to start with a little introduction. I am Lisa Manterfield. I am the founder of lifewithoutbaby.com. I am an infertility survivor, childless not by choice. My husband and I tried for many years to conceive, and then finally got to the point where we realized that our life was really going off the rails, that neither of us, me in particular, I think I had become a different person. I didn't recognize myself anymore. And I had all these emotions that I didn't really understand and was just not the person that I used to be. And so we made a decision several times to sort of stop our treatments and find another way forward. And I know that if you're here, you've probably been through this. That line in the sand, which I'm going to talk a little bit about later, keeps getting redrawn many, many times before you can finally get to the point where you realize, you know what, this is not going to work out for me, and I need to figure out what to do. So during that process, I am a writer by profession, and I write used to write more technical nonfiction and fiction, but I started writing about what was going on, writing about my own journey and trying to tell funny stories to make light of a situation which was not light. And bit by bit started to realize that I had something to say, and I needed to put that out there. So I started the site Life Without Baby and started writing more, and finally started writing my own story, which became a memoir called I'm Taking My Eggs and Going Home. But really at that time, there was no support. Like, this summit that's happening this week is just incredible. It's just such a great resource. And there was nothing like that 10 years ago when I was going through this. And so really I started the community to find support for myself. And it's been quite an amazing journey that I hadn't really anticipated. But going through that, I started to learn a lot about what was going on with me emotionally and about grief. And so that's what I'm going to talk to you about today. So I'm just going to cover quickly what I'm going to cover today, so you know what to expect. We're going to talk about those emotions, why they're such a mess, why you feel all this roller coaster of emotions on a daily basis, what that's really all about. We're going to talk about grief, as I've discussed, and we're going to talk about what happens when you try to put on a brave face, when you tell people, oh, I'm fine. Hands up all those who've done that. So we're going to talk about what happens when you try to be brave for other people. And then talk about giving yourself permission to grieve. We're going to talk about loss and talk about how to give yourself permission and also time to grieve that loss. And then the next thing we're going to talk about is how to create an ending. I mentioned that line in the sand that keeps moving because there's always one more thing to do. So we're going to talk about how to sort of create an ending for yourself so that you can start grieving and healing. And then finally, we're going to talk a little bit about getting support. If you've sat through the summit this week, you have found many opportunities to find support. So we're going to talk about that a little more. Okay, so let's get started. As I mentioned, it took me a long time to really understand what all these emotions were that I was feeling and why I had become this sort of almost crazy person that I didn't recognize. And I finally figured out that it was grief. And I really didn't understand that at first, because I thought, well, nobody's died. How can this be grief? Um, but then I started to really think about what was lost. And when you are denied the opportunity to be a parent, it's a lot more than just not getting the baby that you wanted. And there's so much of our identity tied up with motherhood or fatherhood. Um, there are plans that we made for ourselves. There are family traditions that we wanted to pass along, maybe family heirlooms that we wanted to pass along. But also, for many of us, our social circles are, as we get older, start to revolve more and more about parenthood. So the friends that we had are suddenly people that we have less and less in common with as they become parents and we don't. And even in our family structures, there is a sort of a graduation when you have children from, to becoming a real adult. And so we're denied that step up into adulthood within our own families. So there's so much that is connected to parenthood, and especially for we women, so much of our personal identity as women is tied into motherhood. So that loss is enormous, and it's compounded by the fact that the people around us, even the people that really, really care about us, they really don't understand just how big a loss it is. And so we find ourselves dealing with grief, perhaps not even understanding at first that that's grief that we are dealing with, struggling with these emotions and not having anyone to turn to, because firstly, we don't know that we need help or how to ask for that help. And the people around us, even the people who care for us, don't really understand that what we're dealing with is grief. So what we really need to do is give ourselves permission to grieve, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So I did promise some work, so I hope you have a notebook or a pad of paper, but I just want you to take a minute, if you will, a couple of minutes, and I just want you to think about what you've lost. I did tell you that we were going to do some hard work, and we're starting right away. So what did motherhood mean to you, or fatherhood? I know we have some men on the call here today. So what did parenthood mean to you? What is it that you feel that you have lost? What was it about being a parent that kept you pushing forward and pursuing that dream? What are the things you won't get to do, the experiences that you won't have? What about your identity as a man or as a woman? What is it that's going to be missing for you? And your plans for the future, things that we talked about your place in your family, your place amongst your friends and your peers. And then, there's a legacy element as well. What did you hope for by bringing a child into this world? So if you take a couple of minutes and just make a few notes about that, if you will. Okay. And hopefully after this webinar is over, you'll take a little more time and go back to this and give it some thought, because I realize that it is quite deep work to do, sort of unexpectedly. And so please do go back and really give that some thought. And we will actually be using that a little bit later. So you can see, if you've written even only just a small handful of things, you suddenly see where all these emotions are coming from, where these emotions of grief, whether that's anger or sadness or bitterness or envy or all those things, you see how much weight is carried in this loss. So we tend to put on a brave face, I think, because of, we don't really know how to talk about this, and we don't know how, the people around us don't know how to help us through this. But what happens when we put on a brave face, when we tell people, oh, I'm fine, or, oh yeah, I'm okay, is what my friend calls grieving sideways. And I sort of love this image that we have. If you imagine your grief as sort of a ball, and you push it into a box and you put the lid down on it, and you press down and keep that grief suppressed out of sight of others. But what happens is it finds a way to expand, and it finds little cracks, and it sort of sneaks out sideways. So when you snap at somebody about something completely unrelated, for example, my big argument with my husband about which brand of toilet paper to buy, completely unrelated to what we were going through at the time, but it's that grief that finds its way out. So when you find yourself, having a meltdown in, in the baby aisle at the local shop, or something just triggers all those emotions, and it's that grief that we are not allowing out that is finding its way out. So it's really, really important that we manage that we deal with that, and we do the work to get through it. So let's talk a little bit about that. Let's talk a little bit about what happens normally with other kinds of loss, with what I call tangible loss. So if somebody passes away, if somebody loses a loved one, there are lots of things that happen. People try to say helpful things and probably end up saying unhelpful things. Things like everything happens for a reason, or it's better this way, or time heals all wounds. I'm sure you've heard your own variation of these, but they will hopefully rally for you. They will maybe send cards, send flowers, check in on you, bring around casseroles, sort of give you an allowed period of mourning, which for the most part, and I think in our society, is not nearly long enough. But for a period of time, they will make concessions for you. They'll say, oh, she just lost her mother, her husband, her brother. And they'll sort of give you space and have expectations of grief. That will probably go on for a much shorter period of time. I think anybody who's dealt with the loss of a loved one, a close loved one, will tell you that really the first year is just a blur, and it's not until everybody has completely moved on with their lives that grief really hits you. And that is the same with any kind of loss. So there might be a funeral, for example, or a memorial service, a place where it is sort of socially accepted to grieve. And then, like I say, everybody, after a while, everybody sort of moves on. The thing with infertility is nobody can see that loss for the most part. There isn't something that people can say, this person has lost this thing. You've probably heard things like, well, you can just try again, or why don't you adopt, or have you tried this, or have you tried that? There's always kind of a solution to the problem that you're dealing with. And so I think people don't understand. I mean, we ourselves sometimes don't understand the extent of our loss until we sort of make that list that we just talked about. And so certainly the people around us that we would turn to for support don't make those concessions for us, because they don't really understand the level of loss. So, there is nothing that they can see that's tangible that they can say this person has lost something. But we feel that. Just because they can't see it, that doesn't mean to say we can't feel it. So I think what we need to do is to create that period of mourning for ourselves. And it's not easy to do. It's not easy to do when people around you don't understand what you're going through. So we can take a look at the list of what you've lost. And I want you to give yourself permission now to acknowledge what you've lost. Acknowledge the extent of your loss and give yourself permission to grieve that loss. Okay. All right. And then the next thing that we need to do, which we're not good about, is giving ourselves not only that permission, but the time to grieve our loss. Just as you would make concessions for somebody who'd lost a loved one, I want you to give yourself permission to make concessions to yourself. You are allowed to grieve this loss. It's an enormous loss. You are allowed to grieve it. But you're not going to be able to do that in the traditional sense. So what I want to do is talk about how to make a time and space to actually sit with grief, which I know sounds like a really unpleasant thing to do, but if you think about the grieving sideways, that grief is going to find its way out some way. So better to find a safe environment and a safe time and space to take that lid off, let that grief out, deal with it in the way that's right for you, and then maybe put it back in its box so that you can go about your daily life and come back and do it all over again. So this idea comes from Martha Beck, the life coach. She talks about making grief dates. And, you know, I mean, it sounds like such a crazy idea, but really make a date with yourself that this time, maybe it's, Thursday nights from 6 to 7, or Saturday afternoons from 3 to 4, and you put it on your calendar and you make a date with yourself. And then what I want you to do is find a safe space that you can do that. So it may be at home, it may be in your room at home, it may be taking yourself drive out to a spot where you know that you can sit and not be disturbed. Just a safe environment where you can just sit and give yourself permission to open up your grief and deal with it. Some people I've talked to who've done this have taken a leave of absence. So if you had lost a loved one, you would have bereavement leave. So maybe, if you can allow yourself a couple of days off work and just give yourself that space. I talked to one couple who booked themselves a weekend away together. And they booked a little cottage in the woods and went away for a weekend for the sole purpose of just allowing themselves this space and this time to grieve. So that might not be practical, and maybe the short periods of time might be what work for you. But I want you to put something on your calendar, make an appointment with yourself. Okay, so jot down for me right now. Firstly, I want to jot down that you are going to give yourself permission to do this. Okay. And then I want you to jot down a time right now. Are you going to take a day off work? Are you going to book yourself an appointment once a week? When are you going to make time to actually sit with this grief and work through these emotions? Okay. All right. So what do? You're on your grief date. What do you do? So again, you want to find yourself a safe space, somewhere where you're not going to be disturbed. Put up a do not disturb sign if you need to. Close the door, turn your phone off. And then you need to make yourself an environment that feels comfortable and safe for you. So if you're at home, that might be a blanket, a candle, some music, a pet. Maybe you want to bring a journal with you. Maybe you want to go back to that list that we talked about, the list of things that were lost. Just a sort of a way to sort of wrap yourself in this grief. And I know that this sounds like the most awful thing to do, but it is really the only way that you can really dig into those emotions and let that out. So some things that people do, maybe write in a journal, maybe write a letter to yourself. You could write a letter to the child that you had hoped to have. You can maybe write letters to, maybe write a letter to a friend that you don't have to send it, but if you have somebody that you would love to be able to talk to about this, put it in a letter. Tell them, you know, everything that's going on with you, all the things that you're feeling, put it down in words. You don't have to send that. We might even use the letter later in something else I'm going to talk about. But just find a way to just express your emotions, your feelings, all that's running through your head in whatever way is comfortable to you. If you need to imagine talking to a close friend, you don't know this, but sitting next to my video camera, I have a photograph of someone that I am talking to as I'm telling this. She is a stand-in for you, but you could do a similar thing where you take a photograph of someone that you would like to be able to talk to and just tell them, just talk to them. But you're giving yourself permission to just open up those feelings and get them out. Sometimes you might want to, some people find it helpful to get an item that maybe you purchased for a baby that you'd hope to have, whatever it is that is going to allow you to just take that time truly for yourself and express the things that you haven't been able to express to other people. So it's really important that you go easy on yourself with this as well. I mean, this is some really deep emotional work. So be kind to yourself. You know, if you need to practice some self-care, whatever that means to you, whether that's taking a walk, whether that's meditating or yoga, or taking a nap, or getting a massage, or soaking in a bath, or whatever it is that is caring for you, looking after yourself. It's really important to look after yourself while you're going through this. Okay. All right. Okay. So, did you make a note of when you are going to give yourself permission to grieve? Okay, you made yourself a date. When the webinar is over, I would like you to put that on your calendar, please. Keep that date with yourself. Okay. So something I talked about earlier in the webinar is this idea of this line in the sand. It's sort of creating an ending. And I know that many of you are here for different reasons. My own personal journey is through infertility. I know that some of you have many, many different reasons why you could not have children. So this might be a little bit different for you. But if you've been through the infertility path, you know, there's always seems to be one more thing you can do. And even when the odds are, you know, incredibly low that a particular treatment might work for you, there's always just that little bit of hope. And it just makes creating an ending so difficult. You know, you say, okay, we'll go this last round of treatment and then that's it, we're going to stop. And I know on my own personal journey, I drew that line many, many times. We made the decision not to pursue IVF because that was actually something that would not have worked for us. And so, you know, we made that decision and drew the line, okay, that's it. But a few months passed and then, you know, you start looking at that again and what if? Well, maybe let's try something else. So another round of doctor's appointments and, you know, another round of rummaging through the internet and the bookstore looking for that miracle cure. And so that line just keeps drawing, you keep drawing that line and moving it over and over again. So the thing with a, you know, what I call a tangible loss, such as a death, is that it's finite. There's a line. You know, somebody passes away and that is your sort of starting point for going into grieving and then going into healing and then going into acceptance and all those different stages that we go through. And that doesn't really happen. So we need to sometimes create that line for ourselves. So I know that you're all going to be at different stages on your journey right now, but I'm sure that you have probably got the one more thing. Like, what is the one more thing that you're going to do? Is it one more round of IVF? Is it looking into adoption? Is it, I don't know, everybody's got something different. So, so what is your one more thing? Just write that down right now. What is the one more thing that you have to do before you can finally say, I'm done? And I want you to understand that this line is going to move and that is okay. But sometimes just writing down that this is the one more thing can help that decision become, I don't want to say easier, but at least make you understand that you are making a decision and then changing your plans. So once you're at that point where you have to move on, you cannot do anything else. And I think, I think we all know when we reach that point. For myself, I realized that my husband and I were finally on different paths, that he had already reached that point where he couldn't do anything else, and I was still going. And so this wonderful relationship that we had, this thing that brought us together and made us want to have children together in the first place, was starting to go in different directions. And so, that was sort of the point of realization for me. And there were many other things, of course, that happened as well, that made me realize that I had to stop pursuing motherhood and start figuring out how I was going to come to terms with not having children of my own. So how do we create an ending? And I think it's really important, because otherwise we sort of, we sort of drift along, and we never get to that point where we really sort of face our loss and face our grief. And so I think I really have sort of embraced this idea of saying goodbye and creating an ending as you would if you lost a loved one. You would have a funeral or some kind of memorial and some kind of ceremonial farewell. And I think we can really use that ourselves to create an ending. So I want to share with you a few ideas that other members of the Life Without Baby community have shared with me over the years. Share some of these, and maybe you'll find something that resonates with you. Again, we talked about writing a letter to the child that you never had, and telling him or her why you have to let them go. Depending on your religious beliefs, maybe making an announcement to your God or to the universe or to whatever sort of larger entity you believe in, that you're letting this dream go. You can, some people have given away their baby items. I know a lot of you will find that really hard to do, and I certainly came to an end of my journey long before I was ready to part with some of those items. But that can be a symbolic giving up of this dream and marking the beginning of the next chapter. People have planted things. Maybe you could plant flowers in your garden, or a rose bush, or put a special stone or something like that. Create some kind of marker like that, maybe a little statue in your garden. We can really borrow from some of the rituals and ceremonies associated with loss, such as, burning. I know one of the Life Without Baby members at the appropriate time took all her infertility medical records and put them out in the backyard and burned them. But this idea of burning or burying or somehow packing away something is something that it is sort of ingrained in our psyche around loss. So maybe there's something that you could do there. There was one woman who was in one of the workshops that I ran, who created a ceremony, a somewhat public ceremony in her local park. She got permission to plant a tree there, and she invited friends and relatives. She had a fantastic support circle, and they had a memorial, sort of a saying goodbye ceremony that she was able to share with other people. I realize that's not for everyone, but maybe from some of these ideas, you can find something that really resonates with you. But think about some of those traditions of, burning and burying or sealing. Think about maybe including music or some words that you want to say, something that you maybe want to just speak out loud. Water, candles, flowers are all things that we, associate with that kind of ceremony. So at one point, my husband and I went down to, we lived at the beach at that time, and we went down to the water one day, and we took flower petals and we cast them into the water. And it was a really, that's not part of our religious beliefs, but we borrowed that. But just this idea of casting something off, of letting something go, was so hugely therapeutic, and it was really symbolic and a really important moment for us to be able to say, we are letting go of this. Maybe we don't know yet what's going to happen next, but we are letting go of this chapter of our lives. So take a couple of minutes and just think about what you might want to do that could be a symbolic farewell. Are there any ideas in here that resonated with you? Maybe if you feel like you could share some of them in the comments, some things that you might want to do or some things that you have done. So just take a moment now and jot some ideas. Okay. All right, I want to make sure that I leave time at the end for a Q&A. So I just want to talk really quickly about, I'm just watching a couple of comments coming up, and Janet there just said that that writing is very cathartic, and I want to second that. I mean, I've written very publicly about this on the blog and in my books, but even just writing personally, writing in a journal, especially when you know that you're the only person that's going to see it, it can be really cathartic to just get out all those emotions and what you really want to say on paper. And again, that's something that you could then use in your ceremony. You could bury that, you could burn it, you could cast it, shred it, whatever feels appropriate. But it can be really very therapeutic to be able to do that. So how's everybody doing? I know we've covered a lot of stuff here, and I think this is such a deep topic. I feel like I'm sort of skimming the surface of it and unloading a lot of information on you at this point. So I'm going to talk a little bit about support and maybe give you a chance to process some of this, and then I'd be happy to answer questions at the end. So it can be really difficult, as I'm sure you all know, to find support, even from people who care about you greatly and know what you're going through. It can be really hard to find that level of support. And I think, as I said earlier, I think at this time, it's important to be really kind to yourself and sort of protective of yourself. And I think it's okay to to do the right thing for yourself. Those of us who aren't in the UK have a Mother's Day coming up in a couple of weeks, for example. Probably the hardest day of the year for most of us. And, we put on a brave face. We try to do the right thing for everything else. But I would encourage you to do what's right for you this year. And if that is checking out of Mother's Day, I know, if you have your mother in your life, you maybe feel that you're obligated to do that, but perhaps you could do something with her on a different day. And I think it's okay to check out and not do the right thing for other people for a short period of time. I think right now you need to make yourself your number one priority. Yeah, if you need to hole up on that day, close the doors. I know people who've packed up a picnic and gone to somewhere where they know there won't be other children and mothers, and just made the day for themselves. I think it's okay to do that. Next year, you can come back. You can do what you need to do for other people. But I think when you're really going through this deep grieving period, you have to be kind to yourself. You have to put yourself first. Okay. So if you've been here at the summit, I think you've seen, had lots of opportunities to find support. I mean, there's been some incredible speakers. Lots of them have websites and online communities. They have workshops and groups. So hopefully that you can find some support amongst your peers here. On my own site, Life Without Baby, I have the blog where there are public comments, but I also have a private community where you can start conversations there. I'm going to be starting up a new workshop in a couple of weeks, actually, at the end of May, which is going to be daily interactions and support. But at some point, you're going to need to get support from in-person support from people around you, and that can be really hard to do. So I don't want to sort of share this idea of a support circle. So if you can imagine a target with concentric circles, it gets smaller and smaller, and there's you in the middle dealing with all this on your own. And maybe in the next circle, which is very small, you may have a partner, you may have a trusted friend or a family member who really understands and who you can open up to, or people within this community that you can trust. And you sort of want to slowly move yourself into the other circles so that you can get support from elsewhere. But I want to encourage that, but I also, again, want to encourage you to move carefully and sort of go easy on yourself. So, some people might find that a professional support network is a good way to start. So whether that's a therapist or a doctor, if you have an understanding doctor, which I also know can be hard to find. Maybe, if you have a pastor or some kind of religious leader that you can confide in, that might be somebody that can go into one of those smaller circles. And I think we really sort of are seeking support and somebody to understand us. And what happens sometimes is we sort of burst out to a friend of all this stuff, and then they just don't understand what we're dealing with, and so we end up not getting the support, and in fact feeling like we're not supported at all, we're not understood, and becoming more frustrated. So I just want to sort of give this idea to you of this slowly growing circle of support. So if you start really small, start with this within the community, start with those absolutely trusted people, perhaps professionals, and move slowly out. But it is really important to find a way for you to get support. So I hope that you'll find that from some of the other speakers during this incredible summit. So I do want to leave time for questions. I also want to let you know how you can stay in touch with me if you like. lifewithoutbaby.com is my website. I have a monthly newsletter there where I send out sort of tips and information. There's also, if you sign up for that, I have a free ebook about dealing with difficult situations, like when people say, "So, do you have kids?" or when you get invited to a baby shower. The private community is on there. I'm also on Facebook, which I realize is not always the ideal place for everybody, but lifewithoutbaby.com has a pretty active community there. And if you go to the website, I have a contact page. If you have questions after the summit's over, please feel free to just drop me a line, or you can go through Nikki if you have questions. So that is me. Thank you. I hope this was helpful. I do want to open it up to some questions, and I know Brandy, I think, is going to field some of those. So I will wait and answer questions.
There's been quite a bit of discussion going on. No real questions yet, but a lot of positive feedback about how writing can really help you to get closure. One attendee said that a friend of hers actually wrote a letter to her wanted child and then buried it in the garden.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that can be, you know, we sort of rationalize and process things, you know, in a sort of a logical way. But actually, you know, when you connect, there's something that happens when you connect in your own handwriting. There's a connection between your hand and your brain. And it's very different to the sort of things that just buzz around in your head. And actually getting that down on paper, really being honest with yourself about your feelings. And like, it's okay to say, yeah, you know, I'm really, excuse my language, I'm really pissed off with the world. You know, I'm really angry. I'm jealous of my friends that have children. I mean, that's not something that you're going to want to say in public, but just sort of acknowledging those emotions, and again, acknowledging what that loss really means to you. Putting it down on paper can be just hugely, hugely cathartic. Again, you know, that I'm here talking to you today because I started writing about what I was going through. And again, I tried to tell funny stories. I tried to find the humor in what was going on. And, you know, if you've been through infertility treatments, you know that there are some crazy things that happen. But really, I finally realized that the humor I was trying to find was really just a mask for the emotions that I didn't want to deal with. And when I actually started writing about those, it was enormously therapeutic. So yeah, I really encourage you, even if you don't consider yourself a writer, it doesn't have to be great prose, doesn't have to even be legible handwriting, but yeah, write it down. It really does help.
Most definitely. I commented that I did some journaling when we were going through our fertility struggle as well, and it really did help to process through all those emotions.
Yeah.
One of the attendees did say thank you for giving structure to the grieving process. She said she doesn't want to feel vulnerable to the emotions, but this is giving her a place to start.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's one of the hardest things to do, to open yourself up to, you know, what could be just an absolute dam burst of emotions. And I think that's why it's really important to make those grief dates, whatever that looks like for you, where you have a safe place, that you can let some of that out, because it's going to come out one way or another. And it's much better to have it come out in the safety of your own home than in the baby aisle at Target. It's going to come one way or another.
Yes, that is very true. Mine came out at some times when I wished it hadn't. But your grieving sideways was a very good explanation. Nikki wanted me to mention that she has a Zoom cafe, which is a private closed Facebook group, and we have Zoom chats. I'm a part of the group as well, where you can just have some of those normal conversations without having parents there.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Do you have a link or a way that people can find that?
Actually, Brandy, I've managed to unmute myself. So hopefully you can hear me. Yeah, it's I think it's called on Facebook, it's called the CNBC Zoom Cafe. But if anybody is on Facebook and they want to connect with me on Facebook, either send me a friend's request or just a message request, I will provide the link. But also I will provide the link on the website and the live stream as well. And it's just, you know, if you're watching this and you're thinking, do you know what? Lisa seems to be a really lovely person. I'd like to get a cup of coffee and have something tasty to eat, and I'd like to just have half an hour chatting to her. That's what the Zoom Cafe is all about. It's nothing formal. It's not a support group at all. It's just face-to-face interaction, even though we live miles and miles away.
Yeah.
And it's all about sort of reducing that isolation.
Yeah.
And it's fun.
Yeah, I mean, having this face-to-face contact is just incredible. I mean, the blog is wonderful, but actually actually hearing somebody who speak, who gets you, who understands what you're going through. It's amazing. And I've had some wonderful opportunities to meet some people in person, and go for a cup of coffee or a glass of wine, and just talking to somebody who gets you is incredible. And these online communities, I mean, we're all over the world, but it's a great way to also find people who are in your neighborhood. You think you're the only person going through this, and then you realize, you're not. And it is possible to meet people in person, which is just an amazing experience.
And I think we only find out about the fact that there's somebody just down the road when we are actually starting to be brave enough to talk about it. Yeah. Because you mentioned the fact that you're childless, not by choice, to somebody, and they go, oh, actually, a friend of mine, and that can only happen if we actually step out of our comfort zone and start talking about things. And it does take an awful lot of courage to do it.
Yeah.
However, the reward sometimes.
Yeah, and I think I talked a lot. I mentioned several times about going easy on yourself, and I think that is something that you have to be ready to do. And it's certainly a process. It certainly was for me, even though I had written about it very publicly, and I'd written a book where I laid out my all the most intimate details of my life. But to talk to somebody face to face, it was a long time before I could tell a stranger, when answer a question, the question, do you have kids, and answer that honestly. But what I found was it opened up so many conversations. I mean, yes, there are difficult conversations where you just get the blank look like, huh? What? But so often I've met people who said, oh, me too. And when you get that connection, it's unbelievable. I mean, I think those are, me too has become a very powerful word, in the women's movement right now. But I think in any situation, hearing those words are so powerful.
Yeah, totally agree. And and that sort of leads on to a question that we've got, which was, what can we do about those unexpected social experiences, like insensitive comments or questions that set you back in the grieving process? Yeah.
I would say have a plan. I mentioned the workbook there, the Dealing with Social Landmines workbook, and if you go to Life Without Baby, you'll see there's a little icon for that on the right hand side in the sidebar. Oh, hold on, sorry about that. It's the Italian blood in me. I'm going to sit on my hands. And I really talk about having a plan. So how are you going to answer the question, do you have kids? And you don't have to be honest. If you're going into a social situation, really think about having an exit plan. I mean, I am a big proponent of the fake phone call. I have used it several times to get out of a situation where I felt those emotions overwhelm me. And I think, I have to get out of this, and I don't know how to get out. And I've honestly faked a phone call and pretended to have a conversation and excused myself and said, I'm so sorry, something's come up, I have to leave. Get out of there. And again, it gets back to looking after yourself. And we always try to protect other people's feelings. We open up to somebody and then find ourselves comforting them. And I think it's okay to look after yourself. So again, having those grief dates for when you do get those setbacks, and just giving yourself permission to be set back. It's a process. It's not a linear process. You take 2 steps forward and 1 back, and then 3 forward and 1 back. But over time, you do keep going forward. It takes longer than most of us wish it would take, but it does get easier.
Yeah, most certainly. And I would really sort of stress that point about the fact that it does take 2 steps, 1 step forward, 2 steps back, or whatever. I often say that it's a bit like living in a game of snakes and ladders. that's been taken over by the magic of Hogwarts. So the snakes and ladders, particularly the snakes, which are the triggers which send us downwards, they move. And you think, oh, I've been along this path before and it was okay because I've got a ladder just round the corner. And we're so focused on this ladder, which is about to appear and help us, that we miss the fact that actually there's a snake just in front of us that we're gonna fall down.
Yeah. I've written about that exact analogy. I'm in the US, so it shoots and ladders to us, but exactly the same, exactly the same concept. Yeah, and it is. But you do keep moving forward along the board. You do.
And I also think that every time we go down one of those snakes or shoots, or we survive, we get additional techniques and tools in our toolkit.
Yeah.
And the next time it happens, it's perhaps not quite as bad, it doesn't last quite as long, and we've already got historical evidence that we survived the last time. And that can give us hope, and an immense sense of hope and the knowledge that we have survived before, we will survive this time. And each time we go through it, hopefully those bad days, those wobbles are getting a little bit less deep, a little bit less dark, and things. And also you were talking about the planning in advance, having an exit strategy. Yeah. Andrew and I have an exit phrase, and I absolutely I hate coconut. So if we have a social gathering, Andrew knows there is no way I'm going to mention coconut in any shape or form. But if we're in a social gathering and I'm really struggling, depending on what time of day it is and what the social gathering is, I might ask him if I could have a pina colada. Or, can you remind me when we go shopping, I need to buy some desiccated coconut? And he knows that is a red flag. He has to get me as quickly as possible.
Yeah. And I think, if you have somebody like that, if you're going to an event and you have a friend or a partner who's with you, and you can put a strategy in place, or even I have a partner on Life Without Baby, Kathleen, who is wonderful. And she is also a very good friend. In fact, she was a very good friend first. But she is someone who will call me if I'm going somewhere that I think I might need to get out of. I will say, can you call me at 7:30, and I might ignore your call, or send it to voicemail, but she will make that phone call. So yeah, I mean somebody called it referred to it as emotional gymnastics, and it is. And unfortunately, we have to do what we have to do to protect ourselves. But it does get easier. It does. It takes a long time. It's been about 9 years for me since we finally ultimately decided that we were going to stop pursuing children in any way, whether through adoption or through our treatments. 9 years, it's a long time. But at that point, 9 years ago, I never imagined that I would be sitting here and saying, I don't have children, but I have a really good life. I have a really good life. My husband and I just went on vacation, and we were sitting at the airport, and our plane was packed with families, which at one time just, would have been such an emotional trigger, and, very difficult to deal with. And there were people loaded with, strollers and bags and suitcases and bags of stuffed animals. And we just sort of looked at each other, and we didn't say anything, but there was just a moment of, we didn't get what we wanted, but we have a really good life. We are not boarding a red-eye flight with 3 children who are going to cry the whole way. We are going to have our pina coladas and sleep the whole way home. So I never thought that I would find a silver lining. And I'm not saying, that it's great, it's the best thing that ever happened to me or never happened to me, but there is progress, and it is possible to have a happy and a fulfilling life without that thing that you thought was the only thing that was going to make life good.
That's wonderful. And I think probably on that very powerful and inspirational message, unless anybody's got a particular question that they would still like to be answered, I think we should leave it at that positivity.
Thank you so much. It has been such a pleasure to be here and to have the opportunity to talk about this. And I appreciate everybody who turned up. I appreciate Nikki and Brandy for being so supportive, and kisses back to Helen there. Thank you. This has been wonderful. Thank you.